Dear friends, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce a special guest, a very knowledgeable historian and diplomat from the United States, Professor Ernest Latham. Professor Latham knows Romania quite well. He was a cultural attaché in Romania. He came in 1983 and he remained here for 4 years. He was a coordinator of some of the courses at the training for diplomats at the Foreign Service Institute in the United States. He wrote a lot about Romania and about various other subjects. He had a very interesting career. He went to various regions of the world, various capacities, but it seems that he remained very much connected, and he is very fond of his friends and the country as such, Romania. We just prepared a small leaflet about Professor Latham. We reproduced a famous interview, and in which he explained a little bit his connection with Romanian literature, Romanian culture, Romanian traditions. So I don't want to insist too much on that. Professor Latham will try to give us an insight on American politics, on recent developments. Usually we try to focus on foreign policy. Usually we try to see which might be the American views on conflicts or developments in the world. But I think most of us need to understand also which are the tools, which are the positions, the conflicts, which are the centers of power, how the Congress is functioning, and why in some cases there might be some blockages. I don't want to enter into the area of the topics which will be raised by Professor Latham, but I'm sure that the domestic political dispute over government shutdown, or some of the points eventually connected with some changes in foreign policy but in a way as a response to rescheduling, repositioning the attitudes of the major parties in the United States might be also brought to the fore. I try to prepare myself for this debate in a very special way. During the weekend, I watched a TV series called The House of Cards. It's a very special, picture.
English version?
Very special.
No, English version or American one? There are two.
I don't know. In a way, I had the feeling that, I was watching also something closer to us. But the story is about the whip of the Democratic Party trying to organize a kind of a revenge against those who didn't accept him as Secretary of State after the elections. It's a very interesting. It's a long history about how at the White House and in the Congress some of the things happen. Of course, it's fiction, but for those who have been or are in politics, well, it's very interesting to watch that movie. I'm not prepared to listen to your speech, Professor Latham. I think that most of those who are here will be very much interested to learn from you about the reasons why there were some very tough conflicts recently in the Congress, and which might be the perspectives in the American domestic policy. Professor Latham, you have the floor. No, please.
Well, good evening. And I'd like to start with two personal remarks. Adrian has already mentioned that I was the cultural attaché here, but it's with considerable nostalgia that I come into this building and into this room, because in the 4 years that I was here, I was repeatedly programming American visitors in the area of international law and foreign affairs to come to what was then ADIRI, the Association for International Law and International Relations, housed here in this building at that time. Going back to 1983, I was working very closely with Adrian on this kind of programming. There is also a symmetry to the fact that both he and I received our doctorates from the University of Bucharest in the same year, 1987. He, of course, in international law, and I in intellectual history. And then, of course, the second personal remark I feel compelled to make. I'm going to be discussing this evening two political phenomena in the United States in recent years. The first is the Occupy Wall Street movement, and secondly, the Tea Party. Now, I've tried to be as balanced and as fair to these phenomena as I can, but I fear that that's a counsel of perfection. And I owe you at least a statement of where my own personal loyalty lies. And I hope they will not show in my presentation, but I fear they will creep in around the edges. I started life as a Republican, as became somebody from my family and from northern New England. Now, in the course of time, the Republican Party has changed, and so have I. And I now am a registered Democrat, and I probably view myself as a relatively liberal Democrat. So thus, as I say, those are basically my backgrounds, and you can take them into consideration when we discuss what I have laid out for you. First of all, in the matter of the Occupy Wall Street, this was a movement which grew out of nowhere, but the frustration and the anger of people with what had happened financially and economically in the United States since 2007, the beginning of what we now call the Great Recession. They settled on Wall Street. There was a tradition for this going back indeed to the 1880s. Demonstrations had taken place in Wall Street and in lower Manhattan, where Wall Street is located, to protest various economic and financial shenanigans and disappointments. So it was a logical place to go. Interestingly enough, it did not have its origins in the United States, but in Canada at the Armbuster movement, which was an anti-commercialism, is an anti-commercialism movement centered in Canada, but they saw that Wall Street was the prime target as sort of the financial center of the Western world. It started in September of 2011, September 17th. It focused on Zuccotti Park. It's a small park in lower Manhattan near the Wall Street. For the purposes of policing this demonstration, it presented some special problems because despite its name, Zuccotti Park is private property. It's owned by a real estate firm. It is not the property of the city of New York. So, as I say, this presented in the course of time some real problems. It was not only a sit-in, it was a camp-out. That is to say, tents were erected, sleeping bags were brought, meals were cooked and eaten, and it lasted for about 2 months. And at the end of that time, the police cleared the Zuccotti Park, not necessarily at the behest of the real estate firm which owned it, but the residents who lived around the park, who found this uncongenial. There were questions of sanitation and the general sort of problems that can occur to anybody who's lived near a major demonstration going on for 2 months. The problems which were being addressed by this particular movement were, yes, financial. The breakdown of the banking system in the United States, but they were particularly focused on personal issues, that is, personal debt. Subprime mortgages. Those were mortgages which were written for sums of money larger than the house itself or the building could be sold for. And this, of course, when unemployment rose, resulted in yet further destruction of the housing market because of the foreclosures and the abandonments. And that put a lot of real estate on the market, and that drove down the prices. We have not recovered from that since. They were against greed, as they saw had been practiced by the major banks, which had bundled, that is, put together these subprime mortgages. Now, generally speaking, mortgages are a very solid investment. And by bundling, that is to say, the banks would put together quite literally hundreds of mortgages and then sell them as a bundle. They're a very good investment because they have something backing them up. That is to say, real estate. And you can't go broke with real estate, although you can lose money, as many people discovered. They were against corruption as they saw it, and particularly corporate and financial corruption. Who made up the people for the Occupy Wall Street? Well, their average age was 33. They had a large number of students who participated in this. Their interests, of course, were student loans, which many of them had incurred in the course of their education. The average age was 33. 81% of the participants were white. Only 13% were unemployed. 13% earned over $75,000 a year, which put them very clearly in the middle class and the upper middle class. Other polls indicated that 1/3 of them actually had incomes in excess of $100,000 a year. I question that figure. People who are making $100,000 a year usually do not have time to participate in this kind of a demonstration. 76% of them had bachelor's degrees, that had attended tertiary education. 39% of the participants had graduate degrees. In short, the Occupy Wall Street was a upper class, generally male, overwhelmingly white activity. The thing which was interesting about the Occupy Wall Street, which raises it beyond only an American phenomenon, was the way it went viral. This as a result, of course, the internet. By October 9th, only roughly 2 weeks after this started, the Occupy movement had established itself in 95 cities in 82 countries and 600 communities in the United States alone. Now those figures have to be looked at with some caution because several protests were already underway and they just adopted the Occupy name to associate themselves with a bigger movement. But some of them were quite spontaneous, encouraged by what they saw going on in the United States. What was the end effect of this? It was a major social shifting in the national dialogue. That is, up till that time, the country and the government was focused on macroeconomic issues, the banks, the deficit, the budget, and how these could be used to bring the country out of the recession. This Occupy movement shifted that narrative, and it became much more focused in the United States on what I will call personal economics. That is to say, unemployment, student loans, subprime mortgages, that is, individual problems within the economy rather than the macroeconomic issues. One of the major concerns was income inequality. And one of the mottos of the Occupy Wall Street movement was, "We are the 99%, meaning the 1% which, as late as 2007, controlled 24% of the American income, leaving the 99% to divvy up and to divide among themselves the 75% that remained. The final and political effect of this and its impact on international relations rests in the fact that this is going to be a gradual awareness. The country did not go from worrying about banks to worrying about student loans overnight. This was a gradual evolution. And I think the full impact of the Occupy Wall Street movement will be gradual as well. What did, however, strike international relations very dramatically was the speed with which it went viral internationally. I mentioned the large cities which suddenly had Occupy movements. This, I think, many of international figures had not anticipated. Because you see what this represented by way of the internet was that international relations and international influence was no longer entirely in the hands of diplomats and of formal statesmen. That is to say, individuals who had access to the internet, and that meant a large number of people, of course, could now have an impact on international economics, on international politics, and international life. This is yet to be played out completely, but it's what I foresee as one of the lasting effects of the Occupy movement. As I say, at the end of about 2 months, the police were enjoined to clear the demonstrators out, and they did. It was relatively non-violent, indeed, except the usual complaints about police being brusque or being too forceful. In actual fact, the only real wounding that I have been able to discover was one policeman who got stabbed by some woman in the hand by a pair of scissors. Rather a minor wound under the circumstances. Much of what I have said about the Occupy movement is the exact opposite of what I am going to say about the Tea Party group. The Tea Party group takes its name from an incident in American history in 1773 in December. At that point, there was a controversy between the colonies, as we then were, and the mother country, England. England had imposed taxes, and it imposed taxes on tea, which was the beverage of preference throughout the British Empire at that time. And on December 17th, 1773, a group of colonials, possibly from the Masonic Lodge in Boston, dressed themselves up as Mohawk Indians, went down to the harbor where there were 3 British ships with this, taxing tea, and threw it into Boston Harbor. Almost 400 cases in the space of about 3 hours. Now this had become iconic in American history, and those who object to taxes always revert back in their thinking and their oratory to the Boston Tea Party. This is actually counter-historical. The Boston Tea Party was not about the tax on the tea. It was about taxation without representation. That is, had the mother country made seats in Parliament for the American colonials, there would have been no Boston Tea Party. Conversely, had the mother country turned over taxing policy to the legislature of these separate colonies, the House of Burgesses in the case of Virginia, the General Court in the case of Massachusetts, and the other several legislators to do the taxing, there would have been no Boston Tea Party. What they were objecting to was taxation without representation. Whether their representation was going to be in the mother country in Parliament or it was going to be locally, they wanted representation. They weren't concerned about the tax. They were concerned about the fact that the Crown had imposed a tax on them without their representation. And so, as I say, it was not an anti-tax thing in and of itself. So what is the agenda of the group that now identifies itself and strides across the stage of American politics as the Tea Party movement? Well, it is very difficult to say what the agenda is fully, because the Tea Party is uncentralized. It's entirely a local phenomenon. Unlike the Occupy Wall Street, which has its constituency in an urban setting, the Tea Party has its constituency in the suburbs and in rural America. It does not have a great following in our major cities. The Tea Party generally has avoided social issues. That is to say, those aspects of American political life which deal with social issues. Gun control, gun ownership, abortion, prayer in the schools, and illegal immigration. These are hot button items which the Tea Party has generally avoided addressing. Not the individual clubs, not the individual states, but the Tea Party movement in its disorganization has avoided addressing these social issues. What have they addressed? They are very, very strong on limited government. They are very, very focused on Obama and the new health care law, which they vigorously oppose. Now, the opposition to Obama, and I, again, in the interest of full disclosure, must tell you I'm a strong supporter of President Obama, but he draws not only strong loyalties, not surprisingly, in the last election, he received 94% of the African American vote. As I say, not surprisingly. But he as well engenders a great deal of anger, and I'm not exaggerating when I say hatred. Some of it, I fear, is racial in its origins. That is to say, Americans who are having trouble digesting the fact that there's an African American in the White House. Now, you can't say that in 2013 in the United States. So they have found other avenues of attack. One is that he is covertly a Muslim. That is to say, he is not a Christian at all, despite his protestations. He's actually a Muslim, like his father. This is absolutely untrue. He and his wife, his family, have been worshiping in Christian churches since the memory of man runneth not to the contrary. And then another avenue of attack on Obama is that he's not an American citizen. That he was actually born in Africa, in his father's country, and that he is ineligible by the American Constitution to be president. And there are still people in the United States who adhere to this absurdity. There are birth certificates present to show that Obama was born in Hawaii, that his mother was never in Africa at the time he was born, and in any event, his mother, nobody disputes the fact, is an American. And our citizenship laws provide that if one parent is an American, the children are Americans. So this business that he's not an American and ineligible for the presidency, because our Constitution requires that a president be a native-born American, it is completely bogus. But as I say, I think this shields them from the racism which they generally view Obama through those lenses. They are against taxes. In their most extreme position, they are advocating that they repeal the 17th Amendment of the American Constitution, which provides for a graduated income tax. They support right-to-work laws. Right-to-work laws are basically anti-unionist laws. That is to say, they, despite the kind of frosting in right to work, they are actually union-busting laws. They are for tighter border security and no amnesty for illegal immigrants. Now we have to pause here to look at the situation of illegal immigrants in the United States. This was never an issue before the second half of the 20th century. The Mexican frontier, and most of these illegal immigrants are coming in from Mexico, Latin, and South America, was quite as porous as the American frontier with Canada. People came, they worked, they raised families, went back, and it was a wide open frontier. And then after the Second World War, when the issue of employment and unemployment came up, and there was concern that these illegal immigrants, illegal now, previously not illegal, just simply people who were living here, became classified as illegal immigrants. The border was tightened on the south. It's getting tightened every day. Walls are going up, more and more customs and law enforcement officials are being posted on the southern frontier. And this is sort of a bogus issue. The fact of the matter is that if we were to send back home all of the illegal, so-called illegal immigrants in the United States, we would probably be buying lettuce at about $12 a head and grapes at about $14 a pound. That is to say, they underpin the economy of the American Southwest to include California, where most of them live, working in farming jobs or in less attractive jobs for the average American in sanitation and so on. They're grouped in the American dialogue as Hispanics. This is a terribly misleading term because it includes people who have very little in common except the language. For example, the Mexicans are generally a mixture of Native Americans, Indians, and Spaniards. Peru and Bolivia are overwhelmingly native, that is to say, Indian. Argentina and Chile are overwhelmingly European, variously Italians or Germans. They all speak Spanish, in some cases Brazil Portuguese, but they have very little historically in common. And I can go through one South American, Latin American country after another and show how it differs ethnically from its neighbors. But they are grouped for the purposes of American rhetoric as Hispanics. Some of them are comfortable with this, some of them deeply resent it. In any event, they are the focus of this concern with illegal immigration. But as I say, it is a bogus issue. Were the Hispanics to be sent home, all apparently 11 million of them who are in the United States illegally, the economy of the American Southwest and California would collapse. And everybody knows it, but they go through this rhetoric. And the Tea Party plays along with it. Now, what is their impact on foreign affairs and international relations? They are strong supporters of the American military. And there's an irony here because the American military is the one which has fueled the deficit and which, as a single item, occupies the overwhelmingly largest figure in the federal budget. And so on one hand, they're strong supporters of the military. On the other hand, they want to reduce the deficit. They want to reduce the national budget, and they want to have a major purchasing in the economy of military hardware. Generally speaking, they support the Iranian and the Afghan and the Iraqi policies of the United States government. As the Occupy Wall Street most certainly did not. They are strong believers in American exceptionalism. Now, this is a term of art rather than science. To my way of thinking, all countries are exceptional. That is to say, they have their own traditions, their own history. Ireland is exceptional, so is France, so is the United States, so is Romania. They're all exceptional. But when these people use the term American exceptionalism, they're seeing the United States as a unusual, different, and a leading nation. It goes back indeed to the Puritans in 1630 when the governor, Winthrop, referred to the colony as it would have to be a city on a hill. And the eyes of all the world would be upon it. That's a quotation from the Old Testament. But as I say, Governor Winthrop used it at that time, and Americans have been using it ever since. We are a city on the hill, and the eyes of all the world are upon us. We have a special mission to bring democracy to the world, to bring freedom to the world, and so forth. This is American exceptionalism as viewed by the Tea Party, but not necessarily as viewed by Ernest Latham, for one. Generally speaking, on interventions, they are not in favor of limited wars with limited aims and limited goals. That is to say, they would have not liked the first President Bush when he went to war to liberate Kuwait. That was a limited war and had a very limited goal: get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Once the Iraqis were out of Kuwait, that was the end of the war. That was a limited war. They're much more inclined, if we go to war, to go into a total war with a conclusion in unconditional surrender. And that's not very far off what the younger Bush did when he went into Iraq. It was not a limited war. He went in with an intention to overthrow the government, which he did succeed in doing, and there would be a total surrender. There was no government left to offer us a surrender, so we just took it on good faith. It's divided, in some people's points of view, between one of its leaders, Ron Paul, a senator from Kentucky, who takes what some people have referred to as the Jeffersonian approach. That is, to avoid military activity whenever possible. And then there is the Sarah Palin group, which avoid unnecessary conflicts. But when we do go to war for total victory. They're quite divided in that, and the Tea Party movement is itself divided in that. What are the demographics of the Tea Party? And you'll see these differ considerably from the demographics of the Occupy Wall Street. They are white, they are male, they are generally over 45 years of age. They are generally religious. They would describe themselves as conservatives. They are visibly patriotic. By visibly patriotic, I mean that they wear flag pins, they wave flags at any opportunity, and they generally encase their rhetoric in terms of extreme patriotism. They are, like their opposites in the Occupy Wall Street, they are better educated than the average American. 40% of them are 55 or older. 79% are white. I went to a Tea Party rally in Washington, and I saw virtually no African Americans. But as I mentioned, 94% of the African American community voted for Obama. And since the Tea Party is stridently against Obama and his health care and so forth, not surprisingly, there were not many African Americans present. They are 61% male, and 44%, and this is important, identify themselves as born-again Christians. Now, born-again Christian refers to a Protestant belief among some Protestant denominations that salvation requires one to be born again, recognizing Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. This comes on one usually in a flash of inspiration, and it's a form of religious experience with deep roots in American history, going back to Jonathan Edwards in the colonial period and various revival and Pentecostal movements ever since. Only 7% expressed any approval for Obama. At the present moment, it appears to be declining in numbers, the whole Tea Party movement. But that may be misleading because we're not in an election year, and it is so decentralized that it is very difficult to learn to number the actual adherents. They have running against them some of their election activities, which have been stridently unfair. And this came out in the last election to their discredit. And they were behind the shutdown of the government, which took place earlier this month for about 2 weeks. How does one shut down the United States government? Well, the first thing you have to know is that our fiscal year begins on the 1st of October. So we are now in fiscal year 2014. And basically what happened is they refused to appropriate funds for the new fiscal year. Now, our system of government does not allow the president, the executive, to spend money without congressional appropriations. Specifically, the House of Representatives has the great fiscal power in the United States government. And they effectively blocked any appropriation for 2014. And this, of course, caused some considerable hardship, and it was jammed for the news media, in the sense that they went right to town on it. And so you got some very interesting broadcasts on the nightly news, at the National Institutes of Health, for example, and parents bringing their children and being turned back at the door because the National Institutes of Health had no funding for fiscal 2014. The national parks were closed. This is one of the great prides of Americans, and all Americans at one time or another are visiting national parks or battlefield memorials or other aspects of American scenery and history, and these were all closed. The one that caught a great deal of attention on the television was on the Mall, that great green front that runs between the Lincoln Memorial and the National Capitol. On the Mall is the American Memorial for the Second World War. And it, of course, is policed by the Rangers, the National Park Service, and it was closed. What they had not prepared for was the fact that there were several busloads of World War II veterans who were coming to Washington specifically to see this memorial. And when they got there and were turned aside by the park rangers, they simply stormed it, to the great delight of many people, and not least of all the television crews who were there to cover the story. Well, at this point, the Tea Party saw that they were picking up a certain amount of unpopularity with this shutdown of the government. And so they offered to, what we would call, cherry pick those branches of the government that they were going to close. And obviously, the National Institutes of Health were not going to be closed under this new dispensation, nor the national parks, and so forth. And the Democrats said, oh no, you wanted to shut down the government stays shut down. I mean, it reminded me of what happened in Corinth to St. Paul. You'll recall he was brought before the Roman proconsular authorities for being a rabble-rouser or whatever else. And he exercised the rights of a Roman citizen, which St. Paul was, to take it out of the local jurisdiction and take it to Rome. And at that point, the consul in Corinth, this took place in Corinth, had no choice. Because, as he said, thou hast appealed unto Caesar thou shalt go. And you know the rest of the story. He was tried in Rome and eventually executed. Well, this is exactly what happened between the Tea Party crowd in the Republican Party and the Democrats. They said, you want to shut down the government? Fine. We're shutting down the government. And we're not going to cherry pick those pieces and parts of the government that we're going to open. We're going to keep it closed until you vote us a new budget. And of course, at the end of that 2-week period, the Tea Party caved. And a new budget was put in place for fiscal 2014. What was the initial effect of shutting down the government on American foreign policy and international relations? Well, you all know that it shook the world markets. And whether we're talking about the exchange in Frankfurt or the exchange in Tokyo, the exchanges in Shanghai, they all reacted, as did the American exchanges, to this fact that there was an unexpected instability in the American political situation. And it had specific effects in Asia and the Pacific. It caused Obama to cancel a trip to Asia, which he had planned. He was going to visit Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And of course, in Indonesia, he was going to attend the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation meetings. He was unable to go because of his concerns with the government in Washington, and the Secretary of State went in his place. This, of course, made the major player at that conference China, which was not a development that we particularly welcomed. And a number of the other Asian countries, Pacific countries, also did not welcome this kind of predominance for the People's Republic of China. Then there was the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership, where China was also present, and in the absence of the American president, took a far more visible role. Again, not very much welcomed by the Americans and several of their Asian neighbors. In Europe, well, in your neighbor, the Ukraine, Ambassador Piat was scheduled to go and attend and to speak at a conference on anti-Semitism. He did attend the conference, but because of the shutdown in the government and the constraints on expenditures, he did not deliver the paper that had been written for him. A meeting with EU diplomats regarding the transatlantic free trade area had to be postponed because, again, the Americans could not participate. In the Middle East, well, the sanctions on Iran and on Syria had to be, were threatened because the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is the pertinent office in the United States government, was not able to function. And certain security aid for Israel had to be delayed. Now, were the Tea Party crowd to continue to exercise the kind of influence they have to date in the House of Representatives, we can see that probably American foreign aid would be reduced. They have a great skepticism about the United Nations, which they view as potentially encroaching on American sovereignty, and we would see much less participation, I think, of the United States in the UN. But as I say, at the present moment, it appears that the Tea Party influence is declining, and it would be rash indeed to predict what will happen should it reverse that trend. In any event, we'll have a chance to see, because next year is an off-year election, and the Tea Party will either prosper or it will not in that context. So I thank you very much for your attention. I hope I've given you some grounds for questions and discussion, argumentation, and as I say, I hope my own prejudices have not shown too very visibly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Well, usually we watch on television, we read some of the news, the newspapers, and well, we come back to our budget, to our domestic fights. But it's fascinating to look in depth into the American politics. It is interesting to compare with some things happening in Europe. in Europe, you have a kind of anti-system movement. You have a kind of Tea Party, but much more this kind of radical movement against different types of immigrants, and I'm sure that we are tempted to compare some of the things that we know from Europe with some of the developments connected with the special history of the United States, and which sometimes seem a little bit extravagant for someone from Europe. The way the government went up to the final limit with the shutdown and the kind of ambitious, the way part of the Republican Party succeeded to have for some time the control over the movement inside the Congress is very, very interesting, and also to see in terms of foreign policy the way the Tea Party is exporting or expanding some of the main lines in approaching the question of conflict, the question of aspects of the American approach on various continents. I'm sure that in general we are more inclined to underline, to focus on foreign affairs, on international relations. But I think now we have an excellent opportunity to connect domestic American politics with American foreign policy. And that's why I invite you to make comments, to ask questions, and I'm sure that we'll try to have as many answers or comments from Professor Latham. Please, you have the floor.
I was impressed by your speech. Very short, not many words, but you said a lot. And was very frank and sincere. I appreciated that. Now, I would like to ask you 3 questions. I used to travel to visit the United States several times, many times in fact. I even worked for an American computer manufacturing company, and also I had a Fulbright scholarship at UCLA in Los Angeles. Now the questions. Years ago, I was buying a lot of products, very good products, made in the United States. Blue jeans made in the United States. Now they are made in Mexico or Honduras, so I don't know where. Even the cellular phones, computers and so on now are made in China, or I don't know where. My first question is, when will that change? Who will be able to buy in the future 10 years or 20 years also products made in the United States? Because they used to be very good products, and also was a way to have higher employment in the United States. Now, the next question is, what is your feeling? The standard of living now in the United States is higher, it's lower, it's much higher than 40 years ago. Which is your feeling? I would like to know your feeling because again, you gave us a frank discussion, a frank speech, a frank presentation. And the next question is, what is your feeling, what will happen in 25 or 30 years, let's say? Will be just one superpower like now, or will be two superpowers, and which will they be? Because United States, as I know, because I work also in research and development, it's very creative, and my feeling is that the technological advance is the most important for the future. So, myself, I expect that the United States will just be the only one superpower in 25 or 30 years from now. Those are the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand that you are interested only in what will happen in 25 years. Until then, you are not interested at all? Or, okay, good.
Well, your concern about American industry is echoed in the United States as well. That is to say, we have been exporting jobs, which has resulted in unemployment, and it is a matter of some real concern. This administration has looked at the problem. They have seen areas which we can develop industrially in some very specific high-tech, obviously in airplane development, commercial airplanes, Boeing and such like. And that will continue, and will continue to be encouraged. However, in a global economy, which is where we are now, the fact of the matter is jobs will go, or rather industrious will go, after jobs which are least paid. So, of course, they're moving into the third world. And a lot of our industry, like our textile industry, is virtually dead in the United States. As you pointed out, Honduras, Sri Lanka, indeed Mongolia. I got some shirts the other day that were made in Mongolia. Well, this is good and it's bad. It's good because it does show a globalization and an interdependence. But it is not very good for the American worker who used to work in a textile factory. So it is a problem. We're aware of this problem. We're doing what we can in a global economy to redress it. Right now, of course, industry is not the predominant force in the American employment situation. It's service industries of one sort or another. You asked about the standard of living. That has to be refined a bit. The 1%, which the Occupy Wall Streeters objected to, their standard of living has continued to increase. The standard of living of the middle class and of the, let us say, the lower classes has pretty much flattened out. That is, it has not changed in the last 20 years appreciably. Now, that's cushioned by the fact that there has been very little inflation in the United States. So if income has not increased dramatically, prices have not increased dramatically either. So it's flattened out, but it has not necessarily been painful for the middle and lower classes. You asked what's going to happen in 25 or 30 years, whether the United States will be the sole superpower, and the answer is, I don't think so. There are any number of potential superpowers waiting in the wings, and I'm not only thinking of nuclear powers and nuclear weaponry, I'm thinking of the strength of the economies. Obviously, China is the first one you think of. India is not far behind it. The standard of living in India is higher than the standard of living in China. I never thought I'd live to see the day when I was talking about the standard of living in India being superior to anything, but it is. Brazil is another contender. There's no way that the United States can maintain, or would even want to maintain, the role that it has had in the world since the Second World War. That was unnatural. And the bipolarity between the United States and the Soviet Union was unnatural. And as you know, the Soviet Union has rather dropped out of the race. It still represents a military power, but its population, which was larger than the United States when I was born and throughout the Cold War, is now about half the population of the United States. So that's what I foresee for the next 25 or 30 years. Yes, there will be a decline in the overall American predominance.
Okay, I don't know if Friedman wrote a book explaining that in the next 100 years, United States would be the only superpower. But, well, we'll live and see. Yeah. Okay, Professor Cazar.
Mulțumesc, domnule ministru, și dear Ernest, we are so, not but regular occasion to exchange ideas on such subjects. So I will not comment, but a few notices I during your speech, and I congratulate you for doing this, and probably Mr. Prime Minister for organizing such a meeting. First of all, about America now, we are receiving, and we receive from yourself, more or less some exotic ideas, referring to exotic events. But I am convinced that there is, inside of the United States, a way of life, politically and philosophically, able to continue what America always was and probably will be. I don't know, in 100 years or still more possible. So, which is the core, the heart of the political evolution of the American people, not of the American government. So, this is the problem, in my opinion. Because the parties, occupation of Wall Street and so on, these are exciting events, but certainly not living long. They are, as I said, exotic aspects in a country which did a lot for the main conception of policy in the modern world. This is a problem. I think I have the answer, but probably you will be another one or something more complex. But in my opinion, the authority and force of the American conception, not necessarily activities or events, was the unity between the American philosophy of politics, of policy, mostly, and the European one, in a larger sense, in the democratic European sense, in the sense started during the Enlightenment period and continuing till now. This is one point. Another one is something a little bit funny. I understand so that in the United States, the people when they have discontentments go to Wall Street, in Romania go to the university. It's a little bit funny. Probably we are in this respect more intellectual. I don't know. It's to think of it. And this produced to me another idea, not now, but in the last days. The Romanians are very critical about themselves or about the other Romanians, more or less. We are condemning our country and our psychology and our activities and so on. Now, I was sometimes shocked by this and not very happy. But now I think that this is an advantage of a small country. A small country can be very critical about itself, which is not possible in your country. You should sustain your country even in difficult solutions, because I could observe that it's quite interesting similarities between what Tea Party represents and what the former government, the former presidency, not Mr. Obama, but the previous one, did and expressed. It's quite the same ideas and conception and that spirit. And this is not a very happy story. While in a small country you can be much more critical than a larger one. Not necessarily the United States, maybe an European country, right? Or South America and so on. And finally, only one point about the American exception and so on. You mentioned to me sometimes, and after this I found the book by Anna Arendt about the ability, the banality of bad it's Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem and about the banality of
that was the title that she gave to her.
exactly.
The banality.
Exactly. Frankly speaking, all the countries are likewise, as the same. Yeah, no, I mean that there are not exceptional countries, as they are not insignificant countries. Romania condemns itself, as I said, and this is not bad. But finally, it's a normal country. It's nothing. What happens in Romania, more or less happens everywhere, with some exception produced by one person or another. I will not discuss about such very important person. But however, it's we are the same, all of us, as people, and I received this idea from counselor of Edith Cresson, the former Prime Minister of France, who said, I would like to banalize Romania, helping us. So, making an information coming from Romania as common as an information coming from Switzerland or Denmark or United States. I think that it's good to see every country more or less as belonging to the same very human way of life. Thank you for talking a little bit more, but too much, but I don't know.
All right, well, to comment really, because these were not questions, but to comment on the points you made, the interior of what's going on in America right now is a major demographic change. And this frightens a number of people, and you can see it by the fact that Obama, an African American, is president of the United States. You can see it in the fact that demographers project that by the year 2040, whites will not be a majority in the United States. Now, again, that needs refining. It means that everything will be put in the other basket. The Oriental Americans, the Hispanics, the African Americans, everything except European whites. And that may very well be the case. But these kinds of changes are very threatening to people. That is to say, it means a different America. Not necessarily worse, perhaps indeed better, but a different. And you're going to see it played out, first of all, in Texas. Now, Texans, if you've ever met any, are very proud of being Texans. And they will invoke the Alamo, they'll invoke Davy Crockett, they'll invoke Sam Houston, the Battle of San Quito, the defeat of San, and so on and so on and so on. But within 10 years, the Hispanics, meaning Mexicans, are going to be a majority in Texas. And believe me, they're going to rewrite the textbooks. Because whatever the Texans see of glory in the Mexican War, the Mexicans do not. And we're going to see a great deal of change in the way Texas presents its history. Again, this will no doubt threaten a lot of Texans who will see their idols coming down and the glories of their history shifting. But this is going to go on throughout the United States. Not perhaps as dramatically as it's going to happen in Texas, but it will happen. And this frightens people. And a lot of the Tea Party are made up, frankly, of frightened people. That is to say, people who see the United States changing in ways they do not expect and do not understand and therefore do not welcome. So the answer in the interior is there are Americans who can live with it, and there are Americans who are having great trouble digesting it. You brought up the subject of intellectuals, and that's a very interesting one because I have a whole lecture that I could give you on that. You're quite right. Intellectuals, and that includes academics, do not have the same altitude in the estimation of Americans that they do for many Europeans. Robert Frost, in his poem, Two Tramps at Mud Time, I phrased it very well. These two tramps come wandering in, looking for work, chopping wood. And he describes them as being, or believing, except as a man handled an axe, they had no way to judge a fool. And that speaks very eloquently from really throughout American history. I trace it back to the frontier. As a man could handle an axe and a rifle, he was far more valuable in the community than whether he could decline a Latin noun or conjugate a Greek verb. Because a rifle and an axe were the way you got by, and you did not get by with book learning. And that's pretty much ingrained in the American personality, and probably always will be. I admit to participating in it to a certain degree myself. I was introduced several years ago at a meeting in Romania by a Romanian who referred to me as an American intellectual. And I frankly bristled. Nobody had ever called me an intellectual before, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be called an intellectual. Whether by European standards I was or was not, it was not necessarily a term of compliment in the United States. And you talked about President Bush Jr., the younger Bush, and the Tea Party, and yes, they had a great deal in common. And it will doubtless be recorded so historically.
Well, I checked about Friedman, and his book is The Next 100 Years, with some very good news. China will undergo a major extended internal crisis, and Mexico will emerge as an important world power. So it's clear, this is George Friedman. And a new global war will unfold toward the middle of the century between the United States and an unexpected coalition from Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and the Far East. But, these are the good news, armies will be much smaller and wars will be less deadly. So this is about the next 50 years. So it's important, but also some good news about the United States. The United States will experience a golden age in the second half of the century. So there are very optimistic news about the United States. Okay, first the general and then, yes, please.
I try to make it very shortly. First of all, I I congratulate myself having this inspired presence of spirit to be here at this conference. I was very hawkish, and I have two questions and a suggestion. First, it was of war. Second, power. And my suggestion you will see. You say that the military power is projected in this sense of your philosophy. The war is the continuation of the politics with other means. Please, is it time to see in another way? And I suggest you, somehow the wars are not exactly the shock, the fracture of the bad politics who have not been able to avoid war, first of all. Secondly, about the power. And this is endless, I say, disorder. This endless disorder of the and this mondialization, of course. Where are you feeling that the United States is vulnerable as far as China and Eurasia concerned in this comparison? I tried to receive very focused answers. And for your careers, inside careers, for your domestic careers between president, the government, and your Congress, I suggest to copy the Romanian model. Please, make a treaty of cohabitation, and you'll see what happens. Merci.
It is much more for the Romanian audience. It was not so much for you. I mean,
as a joke, of course.
No, it's a joke. He was referring to the fact that there is an institutional agreement between the Prime Minister and the President, which doesn't function so well. And he suggested in a way that an agreement between the President and the Congress might avoid this kind of shutdown.
Another kind of sport.
Did I translate correctly into Romanian?
Exactly.
Well, if you believe you have a fracture, as it were, between the tectonic plates of the Romanian presidency and the tectonic plates of the Romanian Prime Minister and presumably the Parliament, believe me, there are many deep crevices in the United States government. When we talked about the Tea Party, we're talking about only the House of Representatives, as important as that is. That's where the Republicans, and therefore the Tea Party, are in a majority and can work their will. The Senate is in the hands of the Democrats. The President is a Democrat. The Supreme Court is perhaps the most conservative institution at the present time in the American government. So you see we have a great deal of fracturing. You asked about American vulnerabilities vis-a-vis, say, China, for an example.
Eurasia
and Asia, yeah. Well, the United States has one advantage, and that is it has oceans for frontiers. Now, somebody once said that, or said in my hearing, that Romania had only one good neighbor, and it was the Black Sea. Well, we have two good neighbors, the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. If countries can be described as military or naval, the United States is a naval country. That is to say, in peacetime, which we haven't seen since 1941, but in peacetime, the American Army is very, very small. And it gets demobbed as quickly as it can. But the Navy retains its strength. And the Navy guards the sea lanes, and it guards the sea frontier. China does not have a great naval tradition. It is primarily, and throughout its history of the Chinese Empire, was a military power. That is, it expanded on land. It did not expand at sea. And we all know the story of the attempt to conquer the Japanese islands and what happened there. The same is true, of course, of Russia. A great military tradition and virtually no naval tradition at all. One always recalls, as an example of that, that in 1941, when the European war broke out on full scale, do you know what the largest submarine power in Europe was? Not Germany. It was the Soviet Union. And Soviet submarines played virtually no role in the Second World War. In fact, the only thing that I can recall that the Soviet submarines accomplished, if we can call it an accomplishment, was in the Black Sea when they sank the Struma. Hardly an accomplishment. Otherwise, the German Navy bottled them up in the north, and they just stayed there.
In the Black Sea, we destroyed.
And sorry?
In the Black Sea, we destroyed the submarine.
Yeah, you had the Dolphin, yeah. But on the whole, as I say, the Soviet submarines played no role in the war. And Soviet Navy has not been a great glory in Russian history. That was one of the reasons, of course, why the Cold War was a stalemate. The Soviet Union was a military power, the United States was a naval power. If you're given this kind of historical analogy, it was military Sparta versus naval Athens in the Peloponnesian War. And that's why the Peloponnesian War took as long as it did, and probably why the Cold War took as long as it did. So to answer your question, that's a long way around, but I don't see the United States in the foreseeable future having great military or naval vulnerability.
You have explored the subject only in the military terms, but holistically speaking, it's necessary to have an overview as far as you can foresee an entire panel of the threats in the future, not only military futures, military threats. I put this question because there are a lot of, not rumors only, that means the new Euro-Asia currency, new Euro-Asia common market, new Euro-Asia, let's say new alliance, and so on. Something is cooking there, and the spirit of the American doctrine is kill and nab. How?
I'm sorry?
Kill and nab. Kill and nab. In the military terms, to kill and nab the enemy, to avoid to raise the hand against the United States. This is the doctrine. So I learned in Caliber Institute. Can you kill and nab any threats in the world now?
Well, you're quite right to point out that I emphasized the military and the naval aspects of American vulnerability and did not find it very present. There is American vulnerability at the present time in energy,
Yes.
As there is in China, as there is in India. There is vulnerability in terms of industry. We've already discussed that. There is not vulnerability in terms of food. Or in terms of agriculture in general. So it is, in the end, if you take a holistic view, a mixed bag.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stefan Popa is my name. I am a businessman. My specialty is shipping and transportation. My first question would be connected with this topic. Now, after 15 years after the bombing of Yugoslavia, when the countries located here, including my country, lost a lot of money, especially in losing the Danube traffic, I would like to hear your frank opinion about how do you appreciate that initiative of the United States to act in this way in Yugoslavia at that time. This was my first question. The second question is connected with the fact that Romania, and thank you very much for your very interesting presentation and very interesting, very instructive one. I understand you are a connoisseur of this area. So probably you understood the fact that Romania remains an Latin island into a Slavian sea. In the last couple of years, quite a good number of Russian politicians made here or there threatening declarations vis-à-vis the fact that Romania accepted to put here, to install here that anti-rocket shield and many other movements in the area. So my impression is, maybe it's only an impression, that the American foreign policy in the last couple of years is losing some speed. Under this, or based on this matter, the Russians started to make some this kind of such declarations. And to be more specific, I feel that, and I would like to hear your comments about, I feel that even the Syrian problem, which started, or which at the very beginning started as quite serious matter, and really it's a serious one, it's looking like that now the Russians do have the upper hand on the solving of this matter here. So your comment on this matter, on this problem, would be also quite interesting maybe. I would like to add to that just one thing. I'm born before the Second World War. When the Soviet army entered Romania, I was a child, but I have many things to remember about. And I lived into a town in Romania, which practically until '57, when the Soviet army retired from here, was practically an occupation town. So I hope you will understand my sentiments when putting such questions. Thank you.
Well, first, the bombing of Serbia. You have to understand that we did not want to bomb Serbia. We urged the Europeans to sort that problem out. We regarded Yugoslavia as basically a European problem. I don't want to get entangled in whether Germany's swift recognition of Croatian independence was based on gratitude for Croatia's participation in the Second World War, or whether it was a German benevolence at seeing a small country get its sovereignty and its independence. Suffice it to say, the Europeans did not come in on the Yugoslav problem, which we regarded, and it was only when things became totally desperate, and I'm thinking of the slaughters in Bosnia and Srebrenica and so on, that the United States decided this has to stop. We had been criticized for coming in too late on the Holocaust in Europe during the Second World War. We were not going to leave ourselves vulnerable to that kind of criticism again if these kinds of atrocities were taking place, as they most clearly were in Yugoslavia. And if we had to bomb Serbia to get their attention, then that's indeed what happened. But it was not because we wanted to do it. It was not because we were looking for an opportunity to get into the Yugoslav mess. As for the missile shield, of course, Romania is not the only country which is participating in the missile shield. And this is an internal question for the Romanians. If they want the missile shield, as the present administration in Romania has signaled, then the missile shield goes in. If at some future time an administration in Romania asks NATO to leave, that would be a very, I think, problematic gesture, but it's conceivable. Then NATO will leave, just as the United States is leaving its base in Central Asia at the present time. And as you know, beefing up our relationship with Coconiciano in in Romania. You asked about Syria. I don't know what it would take to give people at this point in time to get involved in another conflict in the Middle East. The American people are delighted that we're getting out of virtually have gotten out of Iraq, and will be getting out in an active sense of Afghanistan by the end of next year. I think at this point, the idea of getting into Syria would be very unattractive. And there's sufficient questions about what the various groupings in Syria represent. Granted that the government is a government we find quite repugnant, but the opposition, which is the other side of the civil war, is divided up into factions, some of which we find equally repugnant. And we would be, I think in the eyes of Washington, ill-advised to come down on one side or the other in Syria. And so at this point, it would be humanitarian aid, medicine, food, tents, that sort of thing. That's all I can foresee for Syria. And I would be, as I say, very surprised if we went in with boots on the ground, as the metaphor runs, as we did in Iraq and as we did in Afghanistan. I don't see it.
Professor, just 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
I think, well, if it's a question about the Tea Party, I would accept it. If not, well, this is, I have a lot of comments on your, and I'm sure that, well, we can discuss whether Milosevic was dismissed after the bombing or later on after the elections, if it was useful or not. But this is another topic. And also, we might ask ourselves, what will happen when the shield is built against the Iranian missile? But if next year it will be in Geneva a treaty between the P5+1 and Iran, and there will be no rockets from Iran, then the construction of the shield will be stopped. So, but these are, there are a lot of issues which can be developed. They are not so much connected with domestic American policy, but doamna Azmanda Dobrescu înaintea, please. Luați microfonul de la domnișoara.
Thank you. Professor, talking about Tea Party, you gave us not a very good example concerning one institution, American institution, which elaborate legislation and rules, for instance, in the field of taxation, without having a proper representativity. So I think that it's not a proper example for other countries in Europe and in other sides of the world. So you suggested me one question. Even after the crisis of 2008, the world continues its Americanization process, as in larger influence for American institutions and values. And now the question, what kind of limits to this process do you think that we Romanians ought to consider natural, organic, or defined?
Well, as to Americanization, that every country and every individual decides for themselves. America is not out forcing people to drink Coca-Cola. If people want to drink Coca-Cola and that's viewed as Americanization, then so be it. The French aren't forcing us to drink French wines, but we do so quite gladly. Does this mean that there's a Francoization going on in the world? I don't think so. Now, American culture does have certain attractions which transcend frontiers. It is not high culture as understood in Europe and in other countries. It is very accessible culture. And I'm thinking now of Walt Disney, of Hollywood, that sort of thing. So because it is accessible, it is accessed. And I don't see any way short of censorship that this process can be stopped. Is it good or bad? I can't possibly answer that question. As I say, American culture in its most popular form is very popular indeed.
I understand that we have seen the same movie, so part of that culture. But we
about the constitutional court, then it's possible to become, I don't know what.
But anyway, we do the same with Dracula. So we export Dracula, and this is, well, in the United States, it's clear. But they take the money, and we take the bad image. Because we didn't want to do a Dracula park in Romania in order to bring here the money. But this is a question of wisdom.
I believe that Dracula exports us.
Well,
It's a vice versa.
okay, so I understand that there are. You have the last question, I imagine.
Okay, I will try to be shortly. Dear Professor Ernest, dear President Nastase, dear guest, we are honored to have a representative of United States here to see our friendship and to feeling together the policy of the state and Romania maybe. If I come back in 1993 when I visit the first time the state, and after that every year I go in holiday or in the professional associations, I like to inform you that for me, like domestic policy states represent an open door from civilization and democracy, a good support professionals and changing ideas, R&D, research and development, and student too. In this year, we was achieved about more than 10-15 doctorate support free of charge from states, including Stanford, Columbia, New York, School of Mine, Colorado, and others. And of course, we have done here a lot of section of students in Cluj, Bucharest, Iași, Câmpina, and others, including high school students. And that means it's a very simply and no complicated visa. This year, 3 weeks ago, we invited President Năstase, unfortunately didn't have possibility to be with us. We were 25 students, specialists, and others, and visited the both New York and Houston, and we had a friendship relation with professional and conference too. We visited a lot of, including NASA, R&D. We try to understand 2 or 3 maybe saluted in the administration of Obama President the second, like to be independent energy point of view state, to have big and major investment staying states, to have works and to have good development there, and of course to solve that helps a lot of people support. And related to that, I like to inform you that anytime we understand it's possible to go in states, it's remain a dream for a lot of people. And 2 questions for Professor now. How do you think will be the evolution with our workers in Romania to go in state like in 1920, our specialists, and the other about student potential collaboration, because we started in 2017 a global center in Houston. Thank you.
frontier with Mexico. At one time, it was virtually no frontier at all, and people moved back and forth with careless abandon. Americans going down to Mexico worked or vacationed, and Mexicans came to the United States for education or for work or for whatever purposes. The problem of visas, and I'm very sympathetic to Romania's concerns for that. I am somewhat disquieted by the fact that Romania has not been put on the visa exemption. Now, this is a quantifiable product as I understand it. And as you may know, the process of visaing is not a State Department function, really. This is cleared by Immigration and Naturalization, which is a separate branch of the government. And it's quantifiable by the fact that Romanians and all nationalities that still have a visa imposed on them must be interviewed. And it's based on the number of rejections. And if you hit a certain number, and I'm not sure what it is, then you will not go on the visa waiver. And if you are below that number, you do qualify for the visa waiver. I would be misleading you if I didn't tell you that as a result of 9/11, the attacks on the United States, we have gotten more surging in our concern for who comes into the country and who does not. And of course, it also applies to the number of people who, as we say, jump their visa. That is to say, get into the United States and stay long after their visa has expired. And again, I'm not sure whether and to what degree this applies to the Romanians. I foresee, and probably not in the vast distant future, that there will be a visa waiver for Romania. And I'm sure that your Prime Minister brought it up in his recent visit to the United States and his meetings with American officials, to include our Vice President. And Washington is well aware of the friction that this is causing in the bilateral relationship. And as I say, my sympathies are all with Romania, but I'm not the President of the United States, and I'm not a member of Congress. Some of this, of course, is congressionally imposed.
Well, this is a complicated issue, so I don't think that you expected a very clear perspective, because it's clear from the American perspective they have to defend themselves. They created a kind of mechanism, successful or not, wise or not, but these are their rules, and well, they have to stay with that. But we'll see at a certain moment, perhaps a different approach. But what is very, very important, I think, is to understand that domestic politics with bilateral relations, with international affairs and the lines of foreign policy for the United States are interconnected. So in order to have a more successful bilateral relationship, we have to better understand the function of the national institutions, the federal institutions in the United States, and also the lines in foreign policy to discover when Europe, including Romania, are more important, in which period, for which party, for which government in the United States, to understand that the focus might change from Europe to Asia or to the Middle East, and then, our margin of action can be influenced also by internal debates over some of the American options. So that's why I think it is important, even if it's not so spectacular, and to discuss about, let's say, action in Syria or what will happen when the American troops will go back from Afghanistan, and the long border between Afghanistan and Iran will create a vacuum, a very big one, with a lot of potential for what different type of developments. I don't want to elaborate. But there are a lot of subjects which are, of course, more interesting from a certain point of view. But to go into depth, you have to understand also the approach of George Friedman, explaining us that, in fact, after the 20th century and 19th century, when European represented the center of the world, now he says that America will represent the center of the world for a century. The 21st century would be America. Well, we can understand that from the bipolar world, we moved to a unipolar model, and now we are in a transition towards a multipolar world. How all these things will happen? Well, it's not very easy to explain. Very much will depend also on who will take decision in the United States. Because if you watched the Republicans before the presidential elections, a war with Iran seemed to be inevitable, an intervention in Iran. And now, we had a phone call between President Obama and the new president of Iran, Rouhani. There are very spectacular changes. So we have in Romania, and this is our objective here, to understand what is happening, not only to observe the final conclusions of certain decisions taken in the United States or in Russia, to understand what will happen, but also to be able to foresee some of the developments. What will happen in Vilnius? What will happen in the next round of negotiations in Geneva with Iran, or whatever? We can give a lot of examples. And then only in that case we can be also really dynamic and active. Otherwise, we'll be only historians, not only diplomats. And I was telling a few days ago, I was referring to a British diplomat saying that diplomacy is about surviving until the next century, while foreign policy is about surviving until Friday afternoon. So it's up to us to decide what we want to do. And at the end of this debate, let me invite you tomorrow, same hour, to another debate about Bessarabia, Republic of Moldova, and there will be a new book launched on that subject with some guests from Chisinau. I think that Mircea Druc will come, and some other people from there, and we will discuss about the past, but also about the future. So once again, dear Ernest, thank you very much for accepting to discuss with us, to share with us your views about some phenomena which took place in the United States. It was very interesting, and the anti-system reaction illustrations put together in something difficult to explain, perhaps. And also, well, the reappearance of a tough line in domestic policy with some reflection in foreign policy by two parties. So I think it was very illuminating for us. Thank you very, very much, and please come again. You are an old friend, and this is, in a way, the place where you have been very long time ago, and you will be also very, very much welcomed in the future as well.
Thank you.